today's meeting of the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee to order. Mr. Zine and myself present. And we have no consent calendar items, so I would like to begin with public comment. And we have one public comment card from Phyllis Dougherty.
Good afternoon, Phyllis Dougherty. I'm glad it's Personnel Committee because I want to talk to you about personnel issues with animal services. That doesn't surprise you. We have 7 total captains and Director of Field Operations off duty at a cost to the taxpayers of around $45,000 a month. They have been charged with nothing. As a matter of fact, the other person that was put off for a year has now returned to work. No charges. No guns were missing. No time cards were defrauded. At the same time, Ms. Barnett has started a nonprofit outside of the city which directed money not to be donated to the city, but to be donated to them because they would make sure it went to the animal shelters. But when I received 187 pages of emails from Ms. Barnett and this organization, it turns out that none of that money is going to the city. It's going to fund a pet shop in West Side, which is walking distance to the person who is the head of the retail committee that set up the store. And we had someone go out there and actually obtain a card recommending that they go to him for training and the full cost of what it would cost them. In addition to that, one of the commissioners went up to Sacramento or contacted Sacramento and set up that corporation at Ms. Barnett's direction. This is the person that is also on the board for Best Friends Steering Committee and the Bernheim Foundation, which ripped down all of our trees and put their banners up on all over the valley shelters. So they are now, this organization is now soliciting packets for donations up to $50,000. It has no MOU, no contract, no connection with the city, but claims that it is a Friends of the City and all money will go to city animals. You need to look into this because my next stop today is one of the major TV stations, and I've been called at their request to go out there. I hope you'll look into it first.
Thank you. If there are no other public comments, we'll move on to item number 1.
For item number 1, an exemption request has been submitted for 2 Senior Project Coordinator 1 positions. This is for the Department on Disability.
And if we could have the department come forward. And
Tony Abraham, Budget Coordinator for the Department on Disability, and
Jerry Dowler, staff with the AIDS Coordinator Office, Department on Disability.
we submitted a report, and the mayor transmitted that report to City Council requesting under Charter Section 1001B for exemption for 2 senior project coordinators. Both of those positions are vacant. We have the authority for one already. It was vacant due to Stephen Simon resigning and going into the private sector. The new position we're asking for is actually a substitution position for the ADA compliance officer. We are asking to have it as a project coordinator in order to be able to exempt it with your authority, in order to be able to open up the number of applicants who can compete for that. Based upon the number of lawsuits, I think you were advised on Friday about a number of disability cases that we're facing right now. We're looking for the highest level of subject matter expertise with ADA, and since ADA that was passed in 1990 is citizen enforced, we're seeing more and more of that particular type of litigation right now. And with ADA being civil rights, it is incumbent on us to ensure that all city departments and our operations are, in fact, in compliance. So it's important to get our project coordinator for the ADA compliance officer authorized, as well as that, the subordinate role of the ACO authorized through the committee as well as city council.
And what's the budget for that office for the ADA compliance office?
Since they are senior, in the past, it had been approximately $73,000 to $95,000. That is what it is for a senior project coordinator. Our concern is, as we have it exempt and we begin looking for a higher level of expertise, anyone could compete for it. We may need what we call a Y rate, but at this point, it's the range of $75,000 to $93,000.
And the city funds this through the general fund, right?
Two separate funding sources. One senior project coordinator would be general funds. That's the ADA compliance officer, American with Disability compliance officer, 100% general fund. The ACO, the AIDS coordinating officer, 70%, and Jerry had those figures. 70% of that is CDBG. The other 30% is through the city.
And how do we do at keeping ADA lawsuits at bay and such?
By, frankly, what we're looking for is identifying gaps, service gaps, especially within all our city departments. I think what often happens is because it's citizen enforced, the citizens have been watching the city, and as the city's been cutting back, they are looking for areas that we're not in compliance with, given that they have been petitioning both the department and the city for a while. Our hope is that as we look at a updated transition plan, how is the city operations and programs in compliance with it, we'll identify even more areas like those that you've heard of, CRA, housing, even areas like public works where we need to be fully in compliance, and the department with the city attorney and other departments are far more aggressive to ensure there's compliance. And one of the areas, of course, we'll talk about is that in the funding areas as well, and having a certain amount of enforcement authority for the department and the city attorney's office when it comes to those particular areas. Because the issue becomes, who are you, Department of Disability, saying we must be in compliance with this federal law that we ourselves may not be familiar with?
And on the AIDS coordinator position side, there's been some question, and I think it's going to be heard tomorrow in committee, that there's several months of unspent HOPWA funds. Is that true? And if so, why?
Our funding comes from the Community Development Block Grant, HOPWA separate funding, and it doesn't go toward the AIDS coordinator office.
Administered by the Housing Department.
By the Housing Department.
So the AIDS coordinator office doesn't have
there was talk of that in the
any
past.
oversight and involvement?
Strictly
on
policy
this
enforcement
issue?
when it comes to ADA and the AIDS HIV aspect of it. So we simply receive CDBG funding, and we use that CDBG funding for contracts when it comes to syringe exchange as well as AIDS prevention. We have oversight over that and mostly policy enforcement. Which direction should we, the city, and with the aid of the county, go forward when it comes to HIV AIDS policy, especially when we get directions from the CDC of in which way we should implement this. So HOPWA, as well as the home part of it, that's all overseen by the Housing Department. And those are areas where we very well may need to get involved with as well, based upon lawsuits that may be coming up.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for the AIDS coordinator to at least have some oversight in this arena.
So we are looking to have a meeting tomorrow with Housing, CDD, CRA, the Department on Disability, City Attorney's Office, with that group meeting based upon the issue we're facing right now. So those are issues our Executive Director, Regina Houston-Swain, will very well be bringing up.
I wonder if someone from Housing could briefly address this as well as to where we are on this issue.
Good afternoon. I'm Helmi Hisserick, Assistant General Manager at the Los Angeles Housing Department. The funds for HOPWA, there was a delay in the RFP that was submitted or made available last year, and that delay has just carried through. We have a 5-month delay in getting the contracts executed. We have one contract executed. We are currently taking both invoices and contracts simultaneously and paying invoices for work that's been done under the HOPWA contracts.
Now, what was the cause of this 5-month delay?
It was primarily caused by lack of staffing, a staffing crunch.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty big screw-up one way or the other. I wonder even if there's a perception of either wrongdoing or very substantial inefficiency, whether it would make more sense to have the AIDS coordinator, as I said, have some oversight and make sure that if such a thing is going on, that at least it gets flagged for the council, and we make sure we don't wind up in a position like this again.
Well, at least involvement. In the same, frankly, in the same way housing is short of staff, we have 16 positions right now. 10 of them are regular. The other are resolution authorities. So maybe with our assistance and better involvement with housing, given that we all are concerned with federal compliance with various laws, with affordable housing as well as with us with the ADA. So I'm sure that's something we can come to agreement with.
And what's the timeline in terms of choosing another AIDS coordinator? What
we have something scheduled now. As long as it's authorized through City Council, we have our examination announcement. Since it's an exempt position, to go out for maybe 3-4 weeks, and we're actually looking to constitute our panel of the former AIDS coordinating officer Stephen Simon and Jerry's group to assist out, as well as maybe 3 people in the community and with personnel to convene a panel. And with that panel, they'll recommend the 2 highest candidates, unless one of the candidates' score is so well that it can be recommended to the executive director. 2 candidates will be recommended, and the executive director will interview that person or candidates and then make that selection. So we are actually on a fast track right now based on what we're seeing and the fact we have not had a ADA compliance officer since January 3rd of 2009.
Well, thank you. Mr. Zine, any questions?
Yes. So there's not been a person in that ADA responsibility since '09. Have there been any lawsuits against the city during '09 and the current time?
Yes.
How many?
I think we counted anywhere from 25 to 30.
Okay.
But I would like to have the city attorney, they will have to compile the number of complaints / lawsuits that have come through. But there has been major ones, especially the ones associated with emergency preparedness. The recent one that you probably heard about with the CRA. I think those are the 2, and the one, of course, dealing with the city sidewalks. Those are the 3 major.
There's a gentleman that was filing lawsuits against anyone and everyone, and it was featured on television recently.
I missed that.
Well, he filed a number of ADA lawsuits against the city, against the county. Channel 7 did a story on this man. He did a number of frivolous lawsuits.
Oh, I did see that.
Where the mirror was 2 inches too high or too low or something to that effect. I don't know if he's filed any lawsuits against our city,
Right.
but he had a reputation for living a very comfortable life off of the lawsuits
Right.
that generated, and a lot of them were nuisance claims where the city decided, or the municipality, whatever, to pay it instead of fighting it.
Right.
So I don't know if he's involved in any of those activities, but he would go out and actually try and find and then file a lawsuit.
Right.
We talk about the citizen involvement. The issue of city unions, and when you have the exempt positions,
Right.
what would the unions, what did they say about that?
Well, we would have to check, someone would have to check with EAA with their concerns about a senior project coordinator, but given that we are proceeding under charter with your authority, that's a discussion that we can invite, but since the charter authorized it, at least you have the grounds to proceed on. Normally, we do have on the charter authorization of 150. We're asking that these 2 positions, one of them formally exempted, be added to that 150. So we would have, one option you can make is looking at, does it exceed the 150? And then under Charter Section 1001B, we're asking that the city has authority to hire, if it's professional, managerial, or a different level of expertise, to have exemptions for that. And this position for ADA compliance officer and AIDS coordinator, we need the highest form of expertise to be in compliance with the law.
Well, I understand that, but then you talk about Y rate, and if you Y rate, you're talking about taking a city employee from a specific department, putting him in that position at a Y rate salary.
That's a possibility.
So,
does not apply in this circumstance.
Okay.
well, the issue of Y rate was brought up, so it doesn't apply?
He might have, I think it's out of context.
Okay.
The rate is not applicable in this situation.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that. And the issue of monitoring for the ADA compliance, monitor citywide, is that for business, private, city entities? what's the scope?
Traditionally, given the 5 titles, we can focus on 3 of them. Usually, we're looking at Title I when it comes to employment. Personnel works with that for the most part with our assistant, but personnel takes the lead of that. And then with Title II, we're usually looking at public accommodations. That's the private sector part that you mentioned that the gentleman is out suing people on. That is usually something by, are they building in our compliance based upon what building and safety have in place? And then Title III is dealing with public services. That's our primary focus. And number 4, dealing with telecommunication. Those are our primary area. Our concern is that when we are providing either some form of service or housing units or CRA units, are they in full compliance, especially with Title 24 of the state, which sometimes meets or exceeds federal requirements. That is something that we have to further investigate to run, as we talked to the mayor's office on, a list comparing what we have in California and then what we have federal, and which exceed what's right now. So there's a lot of regulation going on right now. So those are the 4 of the 5 titles we usually concentrate on.
Is it the public sector or the private sector? In other words, they go
Public sector.
So they don't go out and investigate apartment buildings that are privately owned. It would only be Section 8 or something to that effect where we have some control.
That is something we have to investigate with the housing department in that area.
Okay.
Yeah,
So their requirement or their responsibility would basically be city entities, city property, city activities.
That's right. City activities, especially, they receive federal fundings that have certain provisions that you must be in compliance with ADA and the Affordable Housing Act, and that's what we need to discuss with other departments.
Now, is building and safety, since they sign off, are they involved? Do they work in coordination with building and safety?
That's exactly what we're looking to start working on now.
Because building and safety gets the complaints, and then obviously they go out as the primary
Right.
responsible.
And building and safety concern has been projects come through a CRA in other places, but if they do not know the funding source, they do not know what provisions this particular application need to be in compliance with.
Okay.
So that is something we are investigating as we speak.
And hopefully that will then reduce the number of lawsuits against
That's exactly right. So those areas that we can control because of failure compliance, we can be in other lawsuits, as you described, being frivolous.
Yeah.
You know, that's just the nature of the beast.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions or comments, I would move we approve the 2 exemption requests without objection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilman.
On to item number 2.
The Department of Water and Power is requesting, has submitted an amendment to the Operating Maintenance and Service Unit Memorandum of Understanding to increase the salary for the classification of protective coating worker to the same level as the painter B classification.
Good afternoon. Thomas Simonovsky from the CAO and Victoria Black from the Department of Water and Power. This is a DWP MOU amendment to augment the salary for protective coating worker. It would result in a approximate $2,100 increase from the current salary, the total going up to $84,543. It was sent to EERC back in October of 2011 and was approved. And since that time, the Department of Water and Power has been able to secure a letter of agreement with the IBEW. And if you have any questions for us, we'd be more than happy to answer your questions at this time.
So both positions are very similar. I believe they're responsible for applying coatings to surfaces exposed to electrolysis and corrosive conditions. Is there any significant difference between their duties?
There are significant differences. I would say that for the protective coating worker, they're dealing with much different conditions. Oftentimes it could be in a pipe or it can be in confined space of another type. They're dealing with hazardous conditions or dealing actually with hazardous materials. Sometimes they might be having to heat the material. They might have to apply different types of epoxy. Whereas a painter, it's similar in the sense with a painter where that you're preparing the site. You might be scrubbing it down, you might be preparing it for the actual application, but the painter is not dealing with those types of hazardous conditions.
So even though there are differences, you're recommending that there be parity in their salaries?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Zine, any questions on this one?
So this salary is going to go up to $40.49 an hour?
Yes, it's a difference of, whereas the protective coating worker currently makes $39.46. So it's a slight increase, $2,100 a year for the 10 individuals that are in the classification, it would be about a $21,000 difference.
I'm just looking at $40,000.
$40,000.
I'm sorry, $40 an hour to paint. Is that the norm in the industry?
We share that classification with the city at large. I don't have information on the industry in terms of painting in general, but we've
Well,
been.
I know, and when I look at our firefighters and our police officers and all the other city employees, I don't think they're making $40 an hour. I think it's a lot of money to paint. Not saying painting shouldn't be compensated fairly, but $40.49 an hour to be a painter?
Currently, that's what's negotiated. This MOU goes through to 2014. And it's been, I think this particular classification has been, that DDR has been established on what the role is, and that regular increases in salary have been over the years. That's the rate that's been negotiated.
Well, I think it's a very high rate when compared to the workforce of the city. And what qualifications does someone need to be in that category? What type of educational background?
It doesn't require a professional degree. It requires some experience. I don't have that particular job classification. I can tell you what the duties are in terms of how we've defined it and what's been negotiated.
Just to chime in, a painter does require an apprenticeship training. It's a 4-year apprenticeship training to become a painter.
With the Department of Water and Power?
With the Department of Water and Power, and I believe citywide as well.
What do we pay them on the apprentice program?
On the apprentice program, I don't have that information, but I can tell you that in terms of the city, the annual salary is about $69,000. That's for most city departments, and at the Harbor Department, they get slightly more, about $72,000 annually.
So the Harbor Department would be a painter, $72,000?
$72,000,
a year.
Yes. And then other city departments are $69,000. At DWP, it's $84,000.
$84,000?
Yes.
Well, I just find those salaries, a nice compensation, but in comparison to the other workforce of the city of Los Angeles, I find it extremely high. And if they're contracts, then they're contracts. But I think when you make a comparison to the other salary structure, it's extremely high. Are these folks on any type of furlough program?
Not to my knowledge, no.
No.
On the DWP side, no.
So there's no furloughs, those salaries. And the painting, is there any kind of specialty required?
In terms of the protective coating worker, yes. They have to have 4 months of experience, and in a 3-year period, the 4 months of experience, the way that it's broken down, and it's not literally on the job hours where it would be for a painter. With protective coating worker, it's actually the time that you're spending applying the specialized material. So within a 4-month period where you have to gain the experience, it could be stretched over a 3-year period. But in order to be qualified as a protective coating worker, you have to get that experience in 4 months.
Okay. Nothing else.
All right, well, I'll ask for a motion to approve the DWP request.
Motion.
So that'll pass without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 3.
The city administrative officer has submitted a report relative to the amendment number 1 to MOU for the fire chief officer's representation unit to provide compensation for 3 members who were or may be reassigned from fire deputy to fire assistant chief.
Very.
Marita Aspen for the CAO's office. Before you today is an amendment to the MOU between the city and the Fire Chief Officers Association to add 3 salary notes to the MOU to provide specific compensation levels to individuals who were or may be reassigned from fire deputy chief to fire assistant chief. Basically, these are Y rates for individuals who will be reassigned. The cost to the general fund and the fire department is about $36,000 for this fiscal year, $145,000 in fiscal year 12-13, and $127,000 in 13-14. This has been approved by the EERC. The fire chief is here, as well as the union, if you have any questions.
Yeah, just a few pretty simple ones. What's the difference in duties between the deputy chief and the assistant chief?
You want to handle that one for me, Chief?
Good afternoon, Councilman. Fire Chief Brian Cummings. The deputy chiefs in our organization, they administer an entire bureau of the department, or their chief deputies, the ones assigned as chief deputies are the assistant general managers of the department. The assistant chiefs, they handle an organizational division, whether that's north or south ops in the field, which would encompass the operational resources in half the city for those particular spots, or running a division like our professional standards division, training division, the assistant fire marshal. So that's what our assistant chiefs do.
And how many people are we talking about this MOU
There's
amendment
three
applying
total.
to?
There were three total deputy chiefs that were promoted under the old system. They came up through the civil service system. The city charter was changed in March by the voters, and so all deputy chiefs that have been appointed since are exempt from civil service rule.
And the additional compensation will be earned while working extra shifts, as I understand it. So is this, in essence, like overtime pay, or
No, it's not. They're Y-rating their salary for their position that they're in. If they do work overtime, they will be compensated at the same rate as the assistant chiefs are compensated.
Okay, and who pays the additional costs? Where does the money come from on this?
That'll come from the department's salary budget.
Okay. Mr. Zine, any questions?
Yes. So the deputy chief is one less rank than the assistant?
No, it's one. It's the other way around.
Deputy's higher?
Yes.
It's backwards from the,
Yeah.
from
So
elected.
you're reversing the police department?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So a deputy chief would be the top, and then the assistant chief would be below that.
Yes.
So the appendix shows some apparently assistant chiefs who have been reassigned to deputy chief. I mean, deputy chief's been reassigned to assistant chiefs?
Yes. Since the charter change, it gave me the ability as the general manager to select members of the command team because it exempted all of those positions. So we went through a selection process, and I appointed 5 individuals to the rank of deputy chief, and then 3 of the incumbents, 3 incumbents were reverted to their last, deputy chiefs reverted to their last civil service class. 2 of them are included here because they promoted under the old civil service rules. One of them that reverted to assistant chief was, he was exempt when he was appointed, so he went back to assistant chief position and assistant chief's pay.
Okay, but the concern I have is if you're a deputy chief, you're making more than an assistant chief.
Correct.
And what we're saying is these folks have been reassigned from deputy chief to assistant chief, but we want to keep them at the deputy chief salary.
Yeah, I believe the will of the voters was to exempt those positions to give me, as a general manager, the authority to move them. I don't think the will of the voters was to impact them negatively because of that change. They promoted under the old civil service rules. They took examinations. They went through the process in the city, and they were promoted into those positions and had been in them for quite some time before the charter change.
So like in the police department, when Chief Bratton was here, he took a captain and made him either a deputy chief or an assistant chief.
And there were 2 individuals that were reduced in rank by LAPD, and they Y-rated their salaries for those 2
But the
individuals.
concern I have is, where are you on your budget? Over, under, or even?
We are, right now we're projecting close to being even in our budget.
Is that because of good management or just not paying people?
It's
Or
because
borrowing
of good
money from the
good
state?
management and increased revenue.
So you're not going to go over budget with this?
We're not going to go under budget. We're going to find the money within our current budget.
Okay, so the only concern I have is that if you're a captain with the police department and you get demoted to a lieutenant or a sergeant or whatever, there's a corresponding pay reduction. And the voters, I think, would say the salary goes with the position. So I have a concern about Y rating if you're doing deputy chief position versus assistant chief position, and you have the discretion and authority to move people around, and I totally support that.
Correct.
Same thing with the police department. The general manager should have the authority to pick the people you want in the command, because if they do good, it's good for you. If they do bad, then it's bad for you. But then the salary of whatever it be, the assistant chief, the deputy chief, should correspond. This Y-rated situation I have trouble with. If you're a motorcycle officer and you get taken off the motorcycle, you lose that 11%. I just have a problem with the Y-rated when we've got some tough financial situations, and Wendy Groh, our controller, says we're $200 million deficit going into next fiscal year. Why we would, if they were qualified to be a deputy chief, then we should keep them at a deputy chief, and if we, for whatever reason, want to reassign them to assistant chief, that's fine and dandy, but they're still making the salary of a deputy chief when they're doing assistant chief's work.
And those positions, and that, the way that you've explained it, Councilman, is the way it'll happen for all those exempt positions from now going forward. There are 3 individuals, the 2 that were reduced in rank back to assistant chief, and there's one that's currently a deputy chief who also promoted under the old civil service system, and those are the 3 that are included in this. We made the exception for those 3 because they did promote under the old civil service system. They did have that civil service protection, and it was stripped from them by the change in the city charter. So we felt that those 3 should be treated differently. However, going forward in the future, we will not, when you are reverting to your last civil service class, that'll be the pay grade that you go to, as happened with one of the deputy chiefs that was reduced in rank this go-round.
I see, okay.
He went back to his old position. So this is
I can
just
see
for
being-
3 people.
I can see
That's it.
being fair with them, but then in the future,
Correct.
they would fall into that lower pay grade, but just trying to be fair.
To the 3 incumbents that promoted into the last system.
Okay.
From this point forward, it's as an exempt position. If you're moved back to an assistant chief, your last civil service class, that's
right.
the rate you'll be compensated.
Or they have the option to retire at that higher level, whichever they prefer to do. Okay. So I just want to make sure that we go forward, we'll be able to make sure that that compensation goes with the position.
Absolutely, absolutely, sir.
All right. So if they demoted you to a firefighter, what happened?
I'd go to my last civil service class, sir, which would be assistant chief.
Well, you're going to stay the chief. I'm just. Anyway, thanks for explaining that, Chief.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Just
Thank
giving
you.
you a little hard time because it's so hot in this room.
It is hot in this room.
So you're in the hot seat in more ways than one.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Without objection, we'll approve this amendment.
Yeah.
And, okay, item number 4.
The Personnel Department has submitted a report relative to consolidated reasonable accommodations for employees, and this is for the first quarter, fiscal year 2011-12.
Morning. Good afternoon. Raylan Napper, Personnel Department. It's a regular recurring report that reflects efforts throughout the city to reasonably accommodate employees with temporary and permanent restrictions, regardless of how they happen, on the job or off. This covers the first quarter of the current fiscal year and compares this quarter to the first quarter of last fiscal year. The Workers' Compensation Division reports employees with industrial injury or illness, and if you turn to attachment 1, you can see the breakdown by department of the numbers they track, which are light duty hours, IOD saved, and IOD spent. Light duty hours and IOD saved, when those increase, that's a good thing. When IOD spent decreases, that's a good thing. And in this quarter, light duty hours are up 16.6%, IOD saved is up 14%, and IOD spent is up 13%. So that's the one that we would like to go the other way, but it's not a huge increase like we've seen sometimes in the past. So overall, kind of the steady increase in the good ways and only minor increase in the bad way.
Yeah, just to clarify, light duty hours worked increasing by 23,000 some odd hours. Is that a unusually significant number?
That's a higher number. Like last year compared to the year before, it decreased by a slight amount. So that's a pretty solid increase.
And again, what does that translate to?
That translates to while an employee is not able to give us 100% in their regular job, we may be able to get some work from them in a less stressful job, less strenuous job somewhere else. So at least we're getting some work out of them while they're being paid versus them being at home and receiving their salary or some other compensation.
So that large number of increase in hours would be something we would view as entirely positive?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I mean, ordinarily we wouldn't want anyone injured, but given that that's not likely, this is good.
So they're working is the point.
Right.
I mean, people always get injured, but whether we find ways to employ them, even though they're not physically in the same shape as they were, that's obviously something we view as a plus. And I believe we've worked hard in the past to try and make that happen. And so that would indicate we're doing a better job of it.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions?
No, move it.
Okay, that item will pass with no objection. Note and file.
Note and file.
Item number 5.
For item 5, the Animal Services Department is here to provide a verbal report on a motion instructing the department to report on wildlife management program.
Good afternoon, council members. John Chavez, Assistant General Manager of Animal Services. I'm here with Mark Salazar, who's the Director of Field Operations. We're here to provide you just a verbal update on the wildlife program, some of the things that we're doing, some of the new things that we're doing to make that particular program better and more responsive. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and he's going to give you some of the general information on the wildlife program.
Good afternoon. After a number of months, we've been meeting with the wildlife officer and have received some helpful information regarding all of the benefits that the wildlife program has brought to the city. Give you a little bit of history here. Currently, the wildlife program consists of one animal control officer. The team historically operated with 2 animal control officers. The animal control officer provides citywide assistance addressing wildlife concerns, providing inspections, recommendations, educational information, and resource assistance. The department's team member does not provide regular field services other than educational events. He currently operates solely out of the North Central Center and responds citywide. A couple of statistics I think are helpful. The animal control officer responded to 691 wildlife activities in 2011. There is a significant decline from the 1,521 wildlife activities dating all the way back to 2007. What we're looking to do is we have developed a special operations unit now operating out of North Central. It's comprised of 5 different specialized teams that Animal Services have. It includes wildlife, our permits division. It includes animal cruelty task force, and our SMART team and DART team, which is recently unified together to become one animal rescue team that responds to both large and small animals. What we're looking to do with these teams is to have them be able to support each other in their special functions. And so rather than just having an officer that responds, and let's use wildlife as an example, to one particular type of wildlife issue and might need some type of assistance, where there's others that are not cross-trained in what he knows, he now will have people to be able to resource from to help support his position. And likewise, he will also be able to support other special teams out of the same center as well. These special teams sometimes use special equipment in what they do, and the teams use like equipment in certain types of operations, and they'll be able to not only resource equipment and gear, but just personnel. We see it as a very responsible management move with the resources that we have, and believe it will continue to just secure the positive services that we're offering to the community.
So any impact of recent personnel changes and staffing changes on wildlife management in the department?
No, we have we have recently reassigned an animal control officer to an acting senior animal control officer, one that will oversee
the unit itself, but as far as the program itself, there's no changes to the wildlife officer's support.
And again, how many employees will the special operations manager supervise total?
Forgive me, I believe we're looking at roughly about 10 personnel.
Okay. Mr. Zine, any questions on this one?
The department does still have the cages, because I had a raccoon that was becoming a problem, and I got a cage, and the raccoon went in the cage, and the animal services folks took the raccoon away. I don't know where it went, but do they still have that program under the wildlife management? Where a person can get a cage from the department and then trap the animal and then take it away before it hurts someone?
You know, the wildlife officers here in the room, I can ask and see if we still have those cages available. I'm not sure if we do. Great.
Currently, the Department of Animal Services.
Can you come up and identify and get on the record?
Gregory Randall, Wildlife Specialist, City of Los Angeles Animal Services. In regards to the question of trapping wildlife, the department is not supporting the trapping, relocation, or killing of wildlife in the city. We have
killing. I said trapping and relocating.
It's against the law to relocate predatory wildlife from one area to another. Fish and Game Code 465.5.
So what do you do when you have two little kids and you have a raccoon that's persistent in your yard? What do you do for the protection of your children?
Well,
what happened to me.
I have educational information on how to deter the raccoons to make it less likely that they would appear in the first place. I walk the homeowner through the process of animal eviction, deterrence, exclusionary measures, removing of attraction sources. The removal of wildlife has never done anything to resolve the problems because they're replaced with same type wildlife in the future. Millions of animals have been trapped and removed from various residents throughout not only California, but through the entire United States, Canada, and Mexico, and we still have these animals. So if trapping worked, they would be gone.
What do we do about the protection of the children when we have a situation in a residential neighborhood in the mountain area?
Are you referring specifically to raccoons or all wildlife in general?
Well, my situation was encountered with a raccoon, which persisted, didn't want to go away.
Right.
And finally, the trap took it away and never had any problem after that. But I know that there's coyotes that have been a continuing problem, and I don't want the public to think we're ignoring it. But I know animals in the district where I live now have been killed and eaten in the remnants on the front lawn when the coyotes have attacked. So whether you live in the area of Westwood or the San Fernando Valley, anywhere to the Mountain Fire District, there's a lot of wildlife. And that wildlife comes down, and oftentimes there's sad consequences. So I want to tell the people, especially small children, which is the encounter I had with the raccoon, what do we do? Then say we can't do anything to help you out, and then their child gets hurt, injured, and then the city says, well, we're sorry. We've got to do something more than be sorry.
Well, if we were talking about the likelihood of being attacked by a raccoon and specifically, the likelihood is minimal. You're more likely to be attacked by your own dog than be attacked by a raccoon.
How about a coyote?
Coyote is the same thing. 1 to 5 attacks per year per state versus 4 million dog bites every year. You're not as likely to be attacked by a coyote. There's a lot more hype than there is truth about that. Coyotes will take small pets. There is no doubt about that.
I've actually seen that happen. I've
Right.
seen 2 coyotes in my neighborhood attack 2 cats, killed them.
Right.
And then I don't know where they went, but the fact of the matter is the lady who lost these 2 cats is very sad, and the city needs to say something.
It's sad when the cats are outside and get attacked by coyotes, but these animals also get hit by cars. If a cat
I'm talking about specific coyotes, raccoons, and other wildlife
Right.
that's attacking the domestic animals and a hazard to children, small children in particular. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about car crashes. I'm talking about specific.
I know that, sir, but
We
I've
used to trap, and now we don't trap.
Yeah.
What do we do to protect the people and children, other than saying we're going to educate you, which obviously doesn't serve the purpose for a lot of people?
Well, the public has the right to contract with a private organization that does remove wildlife separately. If they do not want to follow the wildlife program, that option exists for them to contract with a trapper. But I find more often than not, the same people who do that call me and said, I spent X amount of dollars last year on trapping whatever type of animal, and I've got it again. What was your program about deterrence and exclusion? The removal of the animal is not going to solve the problem.
But they can't contract with a private.
Absolutely. That is their right as a member of the public to contract with a trapper as long as that trapper has permits from the Department of Fish and Game and the State Pest Control Board.
They can do that in the city of Los Angeles?
That is correct.
Okay, I want to give them an option.
There is always that option, but, you know, doing this for as long as I have, and I've been working with animals for 31 years. The wildlife program I've been, you know, running for 9 years now. And the trapping of animals is gone by the roadside. That's not something that's going to keep working. And a lot of the people that have called stating that maybe their pets have been taken by a coyote, a lot of that sight unseen, it's a belief because the coyotes live in the area, or I see a coyote running down the street. Obviously, if the cat that has it in its mouth, it killed the cat. Coyotes are also opportunistic. If the cat had been hit by a car or something else happened, the coyote would pick it up. And the person seeing it come around the corner would have no idea that that's what happened. So I've debunked an awful lot of wildlife complaints. I work hand in hand with members of the public from San Pedro to Chatsworth, East LA to West LA. I could talk to people all the time about wildlife, do community meetings, speak at schools. Not everything is as it seems. I open my books to be looked at, whatever you want to take a look at. If people have problems specifically, they contact the city council, and I go out and I direct them through their situation. But again, I am the only person that does the wildlife for the entire city.
You can only do so much in your capacity, and I wasn't aware that they stopped doing the cages, which I've utilized, which was successful. And I have seen coyotes actually consuming animals that have not been struck by cars.
Sure.
Early morning hours in the residential neighborhood.
Well, that's what coyotes do. I mean, they're going to consume anything that looks like the size of the food they would eat. They don't know that our pets, they're hurting our feelings, and frankly, I don't think they would care about that. It's not something that's a personal attack on us. It's the animal is outside. Animals that are outdoors are subject to whatever happens in nature, no matter what it is. If you look at whatever statistics that send animals to the emergency room, it's usually eating inanimate objects that are dangerous or eating poisoned rodents. Wildlife actually sits low on the totem pole of what causes injury to our pets. There's more domestic dog versus domestic dog death than domestic dog versus domestic cat death than coyotes have ever caused.
But they don't get the headlines. That's just the reality when people see it and hear about it.
Well,
You can only do one, as one person, you can only do so much, I understand that. But we have an obligation, obviously, to protect the people before they start doing some things that could create danger to other people, including their neighbors.
Sure.
Sometimes they resort to that.
And this is one of the reasons why management has been looking at how are we managing our special operation programs. Greg has done a fine job of responding in the last 5 years to something over 12,000 types of activities. And they're all hand-holding. I mean, they are a lot of time and education with people because they're all special circumstances, each one. That takes time. What we're hoping to have is more people available for him to be able to resource from to the community, to be out and work hand in hand with the community, and be able to support Greg in a way that he still maintains his statistics and data, and we can still show the benefit of having a wildlife program here in Los Angeles.
And with the population control of the wildlife that's of hazard or danger, do we have any measures on that?
We don't, we don't do any population control. The amount of animals tends to fluctuate up and down the scale every year. It never really does blow up the way that a lot of people think. A lot of domestic animals, there's more population control, obviously, of that situation because of intensive breeding that's done. But with wildlife, there's a lot of things in nature that take them out. There's a 67% mortality rate on most of your wild mammals from birth to adulthood. So they're not all going to make it.
If I were to ask you how many coyotes we have estimated in the city of Los Angeles?
Between 5,000 and 7,000 throughout the entire region. That's 465.5 square miles. And just to let you know that other agencies, Calabasas, other places are now jumping on board for what we're doing, and they want to go to a different direction other than trapping and killing wildlife because they're starting to realize that that's not working, including the city of Arcadia, which invited me to come out and speak there because the residents were up in arms about coyote trapping removal, and they then ceased trapping coyotes.
It wasn't working.
It wasn't working, and it was pissing off the residents.
But then some residents resort to whatever they think is right.
That's very possible.
Now, a lot of what you do is basically telling people best practices. So, you know, obvious things like don't keep your cats outside if you're in a high coyote area because you're just asking for them to be eaten. Keep your cats indoors.
It's deeper than that. It's along the levels of I offer some alternatives that people who have to have their cats outside about outdoor pet enclosures. There's all sorts of products out there that people can utilize to protect their pets if the pet must be outdoors. Some people have actually built them and called me later to tell me, wow, this worked. I don't have a problem anymore. My cat has an enclosure it goes to from the house through a little tunnel. There's a lot of different things that people are doing, using motion-activated sprinklers, removing the fallen fruit from trees, composted food items, the wood piles with the rats in them, picking up, all of the pet food that they leave outside all night long. It's a whole educational process. In some cases, I do go out with a paintball gun for the tough case coyotes. We do a rump shot, and in those cases where I've done that, I've had maybe one coyote return when I've done that. It sends a negative message. The coyotes do not like that. They like, when you use deterrence, just like you would use to attract an animal putting out food, when you use deterrence, it makes a big difference. But what you guys don't hear here is a lot of the same people that would call me up, including one that was a councilmatic complaint, where a woman complained about coyotes following her every day. 30 minutes into the conversation, she tells me, well, when I asked her how she got the coyotes to stop following her, she said, I threw cookies at them. To which that means she was training the coyotes to follow her and anyone else that was walking. So there's a lot more to it. And the calls that I get where I have 5 coyotes in my backyard, and I speak to the person, well, I've never seen a coyote, it just sounds like 5. Again, there's a lot of debunking now because I'm personally hands-on with every single person that calls in.
So if they want to get a hold of you, where do they call? And don't tell me 311 because they're close at night.
888-452-7381, extension 141. What we've done, because it's me, is that we have each shelter handling the calls for their zip codes. The calls are then taken on a wildlife report and decided if an officer needs to go out in addition to possibly sending me the report. I get the report, I call a constituent, evaluate the complaint, and decide whether or not it's something that warrants me going out, because I could call 40 people on the phone in one day where I might be out going to 2 or 3 homes. But I can't go into everyone's home, obviously. It's not physically possible, but I've got situations all over the city, whether it's raccoons on the yachts down in San Pedro as a result of people feeding stray cats, or coyotes going through somebody's pet door, maybe in Chatsworth. Just you name it, whatever it might be, I might be involved in it.
Then another issue came up about an animal gets struck by a car.
Yes.
And LAPD arrives and they call for you folks, Animal Services. They want to put that animal down. What do they do?
Are you talking about a wild animal?
Yes. Not a domestic wild animal. It'll be a wild animal that's struck up in southern Tujunga, struck by a car. It's not able to walk away. It's on its last few breaths. LAPD is called. They respond. They block off traffic. They call Animal Services. What do you folks do? I mean, there's no survival of that animal. Do we let it linger and die, or do we take it out and relieve it of its misery? What's the protocol?
If the animal is irremediably suffering, the animal would be put to sleep. If it's a wild animal, we're talking about wild animals only now. If the wild animal has a chance to go to a wildlife rehabber for rehabilitation to be later brought back to the location in which it was found, with the exception of obviously being in the road, that would be done. The policies have changed on firearms. Officers do not carry firearms on their person anymore. So Director Salazar would probably be best to answer that question.
So I mean, I'm looking at LAPD officers standing by waiting for Animal Services. They don't want to, they're not that familiar other than domestic animals. Now they have on Angeles Crest or Sunlit Tujunga or Haynes Canyon, whatever, some animal that's been struck and it's lingering, and they're there and the people are saying do something. And then they call you folks, and then what happens?
If it's a response to a large animal, let's say like a deer, the officers are to respond with a firearm to the location. They also can call out for an officer to respond with a firearm to the location. In the West LA area, we've recently made an adjustment because of the high volume of deer that statistics have shown. We're now asking for that officer working that area to carry a firearm with them.
So they put the animal out of its misery and not just let it sit there and linger.
Yes,
because the officers don't want to use. They don't want to. They want to let Animal Services do that job.
Understood, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, so they're still doing that in the case of animal. There's no survival.
That's correct.
Okay.
There are issues with, obviously, if you're in the field and there aren't other officers to deliver the weapon, and you may be near where the call takes place initially. There will be, if you get a call for an injured deer, maybe you're 3 blocks away and you have to drive maybe 20 miles back to the shelter, whatever distance, pick up the firearm and then go back to where you were. that could bring about an extreme delay for that animal.
I'm sure the officer would say, here's my firearm, go ahead and do what you have to do.
Actually, they don't want to do that.
Which is why we've made the adjustments for areas like West Los Angeles.
I just think they don't need to have the paperwork and the hassle, but obviously we're concerned about that animal and the suffering of that animal.
Yes.
Okay, so they made an adjustment on the west side. What about the valley? Because we got similar situations out in the valley area.
Yeah, we're looking at the statistics on those as well. We're assessing it. For right now, the need seems to be at West Los Angeles, and as far as the valley locations go, still respond with a firearm, or they can have somebody dispatched out with a firearm.
Because there's still a lot of deer everywhere.
Yes, there are, sir.
Okay.
Now we have a few cards from the public on this item. If we could start with Christine Peters, to be followed by Bernadette Soder.
Good afternoon, council members. Christine Peters, Director of the Echo Park Animal Alliance and the President of the Citizens Committee to Save Elysian Park. I have been a longtime supporter of the city's wildlife program. 21 years ago, when I first became active in Elysian Park, we had numerous officers and lead officers. About 10 years ago, we had to fight to maintain the department, keeping the wildlife program in the department. We were able to do that, and we were able to retain 2 officers and a captain. That was Captain Bowers. This is a highly specialized field. Wildlife, being able to deal with wildlife and also deal with the public in a sensitive way, and these gentlemen are diplomats. They have to go out to the public, as Mr. Zine brought up, and somebody's precious cat is no longer around. The reality is, and I live adjacent to Elysian Park, and I would never let my cat out in the evening. And I do recommend to people who live adjacent to the park or anywhere in an area that has wildlife like coyotes, does not let their animals out at night. Any small animals, chihuahuas, cats, etc., are potential bait for these animals. I mean, they're hunters, and it's in their nature to do it, and it's our nature to protect our animals and keep them indoors. Also, these are nocturnal animals. Raccoons, skunks, coyotes are nocturnal, so the chances of running into one before the hours of 10 p.m. are pretty rare. You do see them early in the mornings, 4:30, 5:30, 6:30 in the morning, but the reality is our small children shouldn't be out after those hours in the area where those animals would be. In the case that they are, especially with raccoons, it's very likely that they could be rabid, or as with skunks as well. So these are issues that we deal with in Elysian Park all the time. Our concern is that the reduction in services specific to the wildlife program. It sounds very interesting, this special operating system that the 5 teams that the Animal Services would like to implement. However, wildlife services are so specific that you have to actually have the background and the training over many, many years, especially in the city of Los Angeles, to deal with these situations. So I would not like to see them lumped into another group. They need to maintain their identity as the wildlife program and continue to work with the public the way they have over the last few years. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Bernadette Soder, and I'm Vice President Outreach for Friends of Griffith Park. Previously, for 7 years, I was chair of the Parks Committee of the Greater Griffith Park Neighborhood Council. Now I'm with the nonprofit Friends of Griffith Park. I'm sure you know that 50% of the city's parkland is in major parks such as Griffith, Elysian, O'Melveny, Debs, Hanson Dam, Sepulveda, Harbor Regional, and Verdugo Hills. And all of these parks feature wildlife. They're havens for wildlife, actually. Some of our larger community parks are also havens for wildlife. Griffith Park, for example, is designated as a significant ecological area under the County of Los Angeles' general plan. Debs Park is a city-designated urban wilderness. Many new parks coming online, like Ascot Hills, will have wilderness components. And then almost the entirety of the LA River, as it runs through Los Angeles, and all the parks that are coming online, as that is developed, probably will have wildlife components too. So the wildlife management program is something that we feel should grow to keep up with the growth of wild parkland and natural parkland in Los Angeles, which is so important to urban dwellers right now. For the many thousands of residents who live on the fringes of these parks and who are going to be living along the LA River as it comes online, The wildlife management program has taught us how to coexist with wildlife, and it has solved many of the problems that arise with the interface between humans and animals. My point of contact for this program has been Officer Randall over the years. I do remember the time when we all had to organize to keep the wildlife management program up and running in the city. This particular officer has knowledge of wildlife issues, experience, and people skills in a very encyclopedic way, and we would like to see him cloned, and we would like to see the department staff and programs expanded. Thank you.
Thank you. Phyllis Dougherty, to be followed by Fran Reichenbach.
I'm Phyllis Dougherty. I'm Director of Animal Issues Movement, but I'm also a trained state humane officer. I just came from the convention, our annual convention for the California Animal Control Directors Association, combined with State Humane Association. There are a lot of new, innovative ways and implements to work with wildlife. We need to have one person who is specifically trained, because these are expensive units, but they are very, very effective. And we do have someone that's very, very qualified. I want you to think about the fact that what was said is that now 10 employees, and remember we have days off, only working 8 hours a day and so forth, 10 employees will be handling animal cruelty, anti-cruelty, that's all the dogfighting, cockfighting, everything else that goes on, the tremendous cruelty load in this city, permits, pet shops, kennels, everything that goes on there, small and large animal rescue of every kind, and wildlife. With 10 people, what kind of coverage will we get in this city? So I think that you need to look at this very, very closely. Be sure that this wildlife officer is maintained as a specialist, because with these new things that are coming out, there was a tremendous amount of our conference was devoted to wildlife and how to handle it in a humane manner. We need to have, he should have been there. He should have seen the new equipment that's available, and it's a shame that we aren't going to concentrate apparently on keeping one person very, very qualified in this, who can pass his knowledge on to others throughout the city. We don't need to have all of these people in this one unit. We need to allow him to have the opportunity to train the officers in the field, keep control of this, and make sure that this is a centered activity so that we can respond to issues like Mr. Zine has, and like we have in Echo Park. I saw a coyote running right through the shopping mart at Temple and Bonnie Bray the other day, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Fran Reichenbach. I'm with Beechwood Canyon Neighborhood Association. I'm the president. For many years, I've watched the wildlife program get smaller and smaller, and I've seen a lot of shifts in personnel and policy changes. When I first met Gregory Randall, it was many, many years ago, and I live in Beechwood Canyon, so there's a lot of wildlife there, and there were some issues with some coyotes, and he actually came out and walked the hillside with me. In those days, he was able to carry a firearm. I think that should be looked at again, because it's very important. I felt very secure standing on the hill when the coyotes actually walked right by us in broad daylight. You know, they are diurnal, and they eat fruit, things like that. We've learned a lot just by having him at our community meetings. We get a bigger attendance when he's on the agenda. I would suggest, if there's any possible way to make this happen, that you can actually hire someone of his caliber, or at least somebody who is able to learn at the level that he's able to teach, because we do need more wildlife specialists in the Griffith Park area in general, and the hillside neighborhoods would probably be very much willing to coalesce behind any kind of action that needs to go forward to get that kind of staffing. I know that there are this is not a budget hearing, but there's money somewhere. I just know there is, especially for something this important. And we are talking about our children. We're talking about education. Parents need educating, and that's an important role that he does serve. So if there's any way that you can do anything about getting more staff, that would be awesome. Or have him start training people. That would be great. Thanks.
Thank you. Probably the one missing piece in this item is that Councilmember LaBonge isn't here, and I think it's not entirely clear to us what issues he wanted addressed in this, even though he made the motion, what exactly his concerns were. So I'm going to recommend that staff meet with Councilmember Labange about the concerns that he raised in the motion and exactly what he was looking for, and that we report back in our next meeting with a written report that would address any of the concerns that he may have. So we will discuss this further at our next meeting. And other than that, I don't think we have anything else on the agenda, so we are adjourned.